Good morning, everyone. My name is Vishwanath, and today I'd like to welcome you to this segment where we're going to be talking about the famous baroque composer Antonio Vivaldi. Now, Antonio Vivaldi is one of the most prominent composers of the baroque period, also one of its earliest prominent composers. He handled and Bach really helped define the baroque period in the modern context, and when we look back to music from the baroque period, we look to their music. Vivaldi was quite influential in the way he was very innovative, he introduced many new ideas and significantly inspired many composers who were ahead of him, who came after him, such as Johann Sebastian Bach. He also was a very skillful virtuoso and contributed quite a lot to music education both inside and outside of them. His music is still played today and remains relevant, with people continuing to enjoy it and cherish it. So today we're going to be taking a deeper look into his life, his music, and a little bit about what the style of music he wrote and perhaps why it was special. So let's begin. Antonio Vivaldi was born in 1678 in Venice, or currently Venice, to Giovanni Vivaldi, his father. He had multiple siblings. Initially, however, most of them died off. He remained one of the few who survived. Now, Giovanni Vivaldi taught Antonio Vivaldi the violin from a very young age. He would learn the violin and pick it up fairly quickly. His father took advantage of this, and they both were taught together when Vivaldi was quite young throughout all of Venice. Coming back, Vivaldi took up a passing interest in composing as well. When he was about 13, he started composing some short liturgical works, and one of his a popular theory that one of his teachers was Giovanni Ligrenzi, and that he learned most of his basic compositional techniques from Ligrenzi. And a lot of Vivaldi's early work displays some of Ligrenzi's style. So a lot of people assume that Ligrenzi did indeed end up teaching Vivaldi at a young age. Vivaldi, however, did not take to a full-time career in music for a while. He initially wanted to become a priest and remained a priest for the majority of his life. He started to become a priest ever since he was 15 years old and was ordained in 1703. However, he was incapable of given a dispensation to not be part of the clergy because he had chronic shortness of breath, something that's now speculated to have been caused by asthma. Due to the fact that he had this chronic shortness of breath, he wasn't able to give any masses, so he was given a dispensation from being part of the clergy. In addition, due to this shortness of breath that he possessed, he was also hindered from playing any wind instruments. However, he could still play the violin and compose just fine. After having been given a dispensation and being excluded from the clergy, he picked up a job at a very, very famous orphanage. This orphanage took up boys and girls. Boys would learn a specific trade and would be sent off at the age of 15, while girls would learn music. And if they were indeed talented enough, they would remain with the orphanage as part of its choir and orchestra. Vivaldi taught here in multiple different ways, in usually teaching violin, briefly supervising the choir, and teaching what is an instrument that is the predecessor to the cello, quite similar in many ways. While working here, he started composing many of his notable works. He had 3 sets of opuses published. The first 2 sets were 2 sets of sonata for 2 violins. So a set of sonatas for 2 violins, and the third set, which is much more important, was a set of 12 concerti for strings and orchestra, a variety of different combinations of strings and orchestra. So he basically got these three opuses published, and it was what he composed during his time in the orphanage. Now, while working in the orphanage and teaching all the children, his relationship with the board which governed the orphanage was always quite contentious. And each year the teachers would vote on whether to keep all the music teachers present or whether to fire them. Now, the vote to keep Vivaldi as part of the orphanage was never unanimous, and in 1709 he lost 7-6 and he was sent out. And after working for a year as a freelance violinist, he was called back unanimously because the men of that understood just how important he was to the music department. He was promoted to be in charge of the entire music department there, and continued to teach there till 1733. He ended up composing many many concertos and sonatas while working there, because composing concertos for the students of their orphanage was part of the job. So as I said, he composed two sets of two sonatas for violins and one set of concerti for strings and orchestra. Vivaldi also indulged in producing quite a bit of opera. Opera was extremely popular in the 18th century, and Vivaldi took advantage of this. He said to have composed over 94 different operas. Most of them were not, we only can recover 50 till date, and most of them were not received very well by the public. However, he still maintained a passion for writing opera and did have mild success with quite a few of his works. Right after having had these sets of concertos and concerti and sonatas published, he also writes a famous religious piece which is performed, known as the Stabat Mater. Now, this was said to have written in a very big hurry, and thus quite simplistic and repetitious in its nature. However, it is recognized as one of his early masterpieces. Vivaldi continued to have a dynamic life, working as a freelance musician or working in a court, and moved throughout. You would work for the orphanage remotely quite often, composing for them quite a lot, having composed tens and dozens of concerti for them, but would often move around while doing so. In 1717, he was appointed a court musician and composer in northwestern Italy. In 1722, he became famous enough and moved to Rome, where he met the Pope and played for the Pope, and the Pope really enjoyed the performance. And in 1725, he moved back to Venice, where he had multiple operas performed. Now, one thing to note here is that it was during this time that he wrote his Four Seasons. Now, for those who are unaware, the Four Seasons are 4 concerti part of 12 concerti and for solo violin and orchestra, and are without doubt his most famous work. They consist of the first concerti, which is spring, concerto which is spring, and then they also include summer, winter, and autumn. These concerti were, as I said, undoubtedly his most famed work and his greatest masterpieces. They employed such innovative and exuberant techniques, and he would describe such things as chattering of teeth, and resting by a warm fire, and running through open fields through music. In fact, each one of these concerti were accompanied with sonnets, which were possibly written by Vivaldi. They weren't given an author. And describing what the music is trying to depict at each point in time, and the sonnets add so much, makes the music so much more multidimensional, and it is one of the only works of this time especially that made use of music as imagery. Music was imagery. Usually throughout all of music history, you'll find musical imagery in forms of events, trying to describe events, trying to describe people, or trying to describe emotions. But Vivaldi took it a step further, and then describing all these different activities and situations with such musical eloquence. And when you hear it accompanied with the sonnets that are meant to accompany these concerti, not only are there amazing musical pieces in their own right, but when you hear it accompanied with the sonnets, you can understand the extent to which Vivaldi was able to employ this imagery, and that's why he probably is considered such a prolific and skillful composer till date, because this imagery is quite amazing, and I do suggest you go check it and you see it yourself. Later in 728, he met with the Holy Roman Emperor, and who was a great admirer of Vivaldi. He knighted him and gave him an invitation to Vienna. They got along so well, in fact, that it is said that the conversation between the Holy Roman Emperor and Vivaldi lasted longer than the conversation that the Holy Roman Emperor would have with his courtsmen. So that's quite something. Later in 1730, Vivaldi and his father moved to Vienna and Prague and performed multiple pieces there. Now, during the 1740s, Vivaldi, like many other composers, started to struggle towards the end of his life, due to the fact that his music was starting to move out of fashion as more classicistic ideals came into place. Use of Haydn was coming up after he died. Johann Sebastian Bach was already quite prolific by the time Vivaldi was drying up, and his music started going out of fashion, so to speak, and he became much less sought after. And as I said, he was not in a very good position. He was once again in financial ruin, and a lot of different things different crises were happening for him, because no one wanted to hear his music anymore. He ended up pawning off a lot of his valuables and manuscripts in an attempt to move to Vienna, because he had thought that the Holy Roman Emperor, who he had had such a good experience with before, would sympathize with him and would appoint him as a court musician and composer. However, unfortunately, by the time he got to Vienna, the emperor had died a year ago, and he was left without royal protection or a source of income. He was immediately impoverished. He became very poor and died due to internal infection in 1741. and was given a common grave. Now, unlike what many people suspect, Joseph Haydn had nothing to do with his funeral, because there was no music involved. As I said, he was buried in a common grave and died relatively penniless because his music was going out of fashion. And yet, that music is still remembered in such a glamorous light today. His music is often characterized by being extremely exuberant and flamboyant. He was very innovative, especially for his time, and the way that he composed the music and the elements that he incorporated, and made it much more multi-dimensional than the other music that existed at that period in time. The rhythmical structure he used in particular was much more diverse and much more vital in the way he employed it, and that's probably why it is held in such high regard, and it was such something new back when he was composing for the first time. And as I said, the musical imagery that is used in the Four Seasons is, I would argue, nearly unparalleled to this day. As I said, not many people attempted to use music for imagery in the same way that Vivaldi did during his Four Seasons, for the concerti that consists of the Four Seasons. And I believe that that's why we think of him as a musical genius till date. Regardless, his intention was not to create very complex music. Unlike his contemporary Bach, he was not concerned with taking music as an intellectual challenge and making music very complicated. He wanted to entertain his audiences with interesting rhythmical structures and catchy melodies, and that's what he did. His music is not overly complicated or very complicatedly structured. It's simple, it's down to earth, and it's entertaining. And that's what characterizes Vivaldi. That's what he would try to do to his music. And I think the simplicity and focus on just entertaining the audience and giving them a good time is probably why his music is still listened to today. And that musical imagery that he employed during the Four Seasons remains unparalleled. So, it does not need to be said that he was an extremely skillful instrumentalist, an extremely skillful and prolific composer, and he remains relevant and influential till date. That was a small segment on Antonio Vivaldi, one of the greatest composers of the Baroque period. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.